So, just, because there's gonna be a lot of civil rights battles in the next year or so, as the court system deals with the initiatives that are coming from the new term of President Trump. And so you are from a civil rights standpoint, you are in a remarkable time and place. Actually, not unlike what I went through in my childhood and particularly my adolescence. Because I was born in 1951, and the civil rights movement really hit its stride with the freedom rides from freedom rides through the Voting Rights Act. That is prime civil rights time. So that went from when I was 10 to 15. I think you're going to be living in a comparable time period. So make notes to yourself of what you're hearing and what you're experiencing, because 15 years from now you could be teaching a class somewhere about this era, because I think it's going to have comparable ramifications for our country. Now, I don't know how it's going to turn out. Just like people really didn't know how it was going to turn out. When we look back at this time frame, particularly when we start with Brown versus Board of Education 54, which we're going to cover today, to the Voting Rights Act, people didn't really know how that was going to all turn out. Now we think of it as sort of this inevitable thing, but trust me, as someone who lived through it, we didn't know how it was going to turn out. And that's sort of where you are. So just congratulations, you picked an interesting time to live. you thought that through very well, when or maybe your parents did. Somebody had an intention. All right, so but that's the current news. So I just wanted to bring current events into our classroom. All right, so let's go back to this. How does this struggle really culminate? And so we go back to Plessy v. Ferguson. Who all can tell me what Plessy v. Ferguson was about? Anybody recognize the scene? Any takers? All right. Early 1890s. There's a streetcar in Louisiana, not named Desire. I can't remember what it was called. I've been on the St. Charles streetcar a bunch, but there was a streetcar in Louisiana, and there was a white section and there was a colored section, because Louisiana had passed. It's now the end. Reconstruction had died. Blacks have lost their rights thanks to legislatures that have come in after federal troops have gone away from the South. And the Louisiana legislature passed laws saying that you could create separate worlds, white worlds and colored worlds. Colored is the term of the time. Colored is the polite word of the time. And so, in Louisiana in particular, there was a group of people known as Creoles, which were within the black community. They would have been very light-skinned. Many of them could pass for being white. And we've just started to come into a time period in America where there would be a motivation for a black person to pass, or a colored person to pass as a white person, because you had a lot more rights and a lot more privileges. And Homer Plessy was that kind of a person. He could pass for being white. If you just glanced at him, you would not think initially that they were colored or black. And so Homer Plessy, who decided to make a fuss about this new law, gets into the streetcar and sits in the white section, or sits, and nobody notices one way or the other. And then he self-identifies as colored. And they say, well, you have to move. Well, I don't want to move. seems like nobody seemed to mind when I was here when you thought I was white. No, you gotta go. He wouldn't go, and he gets arrested. And his case goes all the way to the Supreme Court of whether it is all right to create these separate worlds, white and colored. And the Supreme Court puts the final nail in the coffin of the radical Republican desire to create a free America after the Civil War. They say, no, it's okay to create separate worlds, white and colored. They just have to be equal. Separate but equal is just fine. Legislatures, you can separate the races. Some who were religiously minded said, well, that was what God had in mind. God had in mind to put white people in Europe and black people in Africa, and colored and yellow people in Asia. So if that's what God wanted, it's certainly good enough for America. And that religious perspective is going to follow us through the 20th century in how the South responds to immigration. And so the state legislatures heard this wonderful word, separate. Supreme Court said separate but equal. And the white legislators said, love that word separate. And then somebody else would say, and he, well, I couldn't hear you. Love that word separate. And he, well, I couldn't hear you. What were you saying? No, I can't hear you. Never mind. And so what you have happening that becomes the world of Jim Crow is separate. And and that is what leads us to the struggle for civil rights. So let's go to the next page, see what happens. All right. So, who's ever heard of something called the Industrial Revolution? You guys know computers does that? Basically, in large part spurred on by the Civil War, America as a country started making stuff. Technology, amazing thing, like steel. We gotta make steel for the railroads. We have these incredible cotton mills up north where we're creating clothes and everything, and we basically take on Europe as a manufacturer. If you think back to the time of the American Revolution, we didn't manufacture much of anything. We got all of our stuff from the mother country, from England. And then as we start becoming our own country, we start making more and more. But really, it's the Industrial Revolution, technology, the railroads. Later, it's going to become the cars. We start building stuff in this country. And for the most part, we're starting to build it up in the northern parts of the country. So the South is staying agricultural, with a few exceptions. So people start going north because that's where the jobs are. And because in the South, the life of a black person becomes so miserable, they start wanting to leave. It takes a lot to want to leave your home. It took Hitler to get my mother to leave Germany. It took the Tsar to get my grandparents to leave Russia, because it wasn't a good place if you were Jewish. It takes something to make people want to leave their home. Most people don't want to leave their home. And it took the misery of Jim Crow to make black people want to leave the South, and they do. But when they go north, now they're starting to compete for jobs against other people who wanted to leave their homes. The people who wanted to leave their homes in Poland and in Russia and in Germany and in Italy. And those people, although as America, they don't at this time and frame, they're just starting to be thought of as white. You know, I heard listened to a great lecture one time about when did Italians become white? Because when they got here, they weren't white. When the Irish got here, they weren't white. When the Jews got here, we weren't white. We weren't black, but we were something else. Well, this process, this melting pot process, is going to create conflict. And in 1908, there was a race riot in Springfield, Illinois. Now, I grew up in the 60s. I'm going to list some things for you. Detroit, Newark, Watts. We had what were called in my day urban riots or race riots. And that was a reflection of blacks in those communities taking the streets against unfair labor practices, unfair police brutality, just crummy living conditions. So race riots when I was growing up meant black people rioting. We're going to talk about race riots today, but this is all about white people rioting. White people rioting because they're having to, in urban settings, because they're having to deal with black people saying, in the words of Langston Hughes, I too am an American. I too have rights. White people didn't like that back in the early 1900s. And so, as a result of this riot in Springfield, let's go to the next slide. This great intellectual, W.E.B. Du Bois, William Edward Burghardt. It's the Burghardt that always gets me. W.E.B. Du Bois, he's the first black person to get a PhD in political science is it political science or history, from Harvard University. He is really one of the great black intellectuals of the 20th century. He decides to start a new organization. Can we get the next slide? He decides to start an organization called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That's a mouthful. We know it as the NAACP. They start in 1909, and it started by some very important black Americans, Ida B. Wells, W.B. Du Bois, and a bunch of Jews. Henry Moskowitz, Mary White Ovington, and some very progressive white people, Oswald Garrison Villard, William English Whalen. Oswald Garrison Villard. Where do you think his parents got the name Garrison to give him his middle name? Any guesses from what you learned in the Civil War?
Garrison.
I'm sorry?
Garrison.
William Lloyd Garrison, the great abolitionist. That's who he's named after. I don't remember whether he's actually part of that family or not. But these are the people that start the NAACP. It's still in existence today. We have a very active chapter here in Portland. But
Remember at the event on Friday,
James Posey
president
spoke.
and the vice.
Yeah, president spoke. Let's go to the next. Yeah, and thank you guys so much for coming. It was such a kick for me to see you there. I love that. I love that. All right, so World War I. Anybody ever heard of the Harlem Hellfighters? Anybody heard of them? Yeah, Peter, I figured you might be. You're my history man. Tell me what you know about them.
I think they were like not one of the first, but like they were like a black regiment in World War I that like I don't remember what front they were on though.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let me tell you a little bit about them. You know, when World War I happens, we're fighting the Germans. We come in. World War I starts as a fight between Germany and Austria against England, France, and Russia.
In Serbia.
Well, and Serbia is really, Serbia. It starts in Serbia. But the main powers are what they call the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, and the Triple Entente, which means England, France, and Russia. And we stay out of it. Like, not our problem. But then it starts in 1914. In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson decides we're in it. So we have a draft. And everybody, you know, everybody who's eligible age-wise gets drafted. They gotta go in the Army. And that included African Americans. And there was a National Guard unit in New York, 15th National Guard, and they get brought into the United States Army and renamed the 369th Regiment of the U.S. Army, and they're sent to France. And when they get to France, the head of the American Army, a guy named Jack Pershing, says, I don't want black troops. I don't want them fighting for me. And France, which is desperate to stop the Germans from winning the war, says, we'll take them. Because France had been using black troops all throughout the war, primarily from Senegal in West Africa. They loved anybody, and they particularly liked the ferocity of their African soldiers. They said, these guys look just like them. I bet you they're good. We'll take them. And so these guys actually fought in the French army. They didn't fight in the American army because Pershing didn't want them. So they get thrown into battle right away. They're going to go through the war. They are the first American soldiers to reach the Rhine River in Germany. They fought longer in the war than any white American unit or any other black American unit. And they come home heroes. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a parade, Fifth Avenue in New York. Big parade. They get to take part in the parade. They march all the way back up to Harlem. So they are the most famous of the black units, but I think close to hundreds of thousands of African American men were in the Army. And, you know, now my brother was in the Army during the Vietnam War. I was not. My student affiliates held up for me. But if you put a person in the uniform of their country, have enough faith in them that you hand them a rifle and say, here, go kill people on behalf of my country, of your country. And that's a very empowering thing, trust me. If somebody gives you a uniform and a gun and says, go kill somebody on my behalf, that's very empowering. You might even think you have rights. And what happens in 1919 is all those soldiers came home. And when they came home, they thought, maybe we should be treated better. And this is when I started talking about the riots. From 1919 to 1921, we had a series of riots all throughout America of white people rioting against black people who thought they had rights. And the most famous one is, now it's the most famous, is the one that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Greenwood Massacre, where basically the black section of Tulsa was destroyed. Hundreds of black people were killed. And that's what was just happening in America as we were grappling with this notion of civil rights. And I think so this man here, James Weldon Johnson, was he's a brilliant man. He was a lawyer. He was an educator and a lawyer. He becomes a diplomat. President Teddy Roosevelt sends him. I think he was the American ambassador to Haiti, and he had a couple other diplomatic positions. And when the Republicans lose office, William Howard Taft followed Roosevelt when Taft is out of office, and Woodrow Wilson, the first Democrat to become president in a long time, becomes president. Woodrow Wilson reinstitutes segregation in the federal government. And Wilson fires Johnson from his position in diplomatic order. Well, Johnson goes on to become the head of the NAACP. You may not know his name, but have you ever heard of a song called Lift Every Voice and Sing? It's known as the Black National Anthem of this country. Lift every voice and sing, ya-da-da, nations ring, ya-da-da-da, ya-da, of liberty. We'll have to play that in class.
Yeah,
think
they're
I've heard
starting
that.
to play it at sporting events more
Right.
and more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, well, he wrote the words and his brother wrote the music. But for our story, what's important is the NAACP is absolutely horrified by what's happening in America. You have these riots on a mountaintop in Georgia, on Stone Mountain in Georgia. A group decides it's time to come back to power. They're called the Ku Klux Klan. We have 3 risings of the Klan in our country over the course of our history. The first we talked about during Reconstruction, when they rose up to fight against black rights right after the Civil War. The second time is now that we're talking about right here. The Klan has come back to power, and the Klan, what's interesting is they are strongly against black rights, but that's actually, blacks had very few rights at this point. So what really has got them ticked off is the fact that all of these people that I remember told you that they weren't white, the Poles from Poland, Italians from Italy. Anybody know what the primary religion was in those countries?
Jewish.
I'm sorry?
Not Jewish.
Not Jewish. Catholic, some say Catholics?
I think it's Catholic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Catholicism. The Catholicism of the Poles and the Italians is part of what made them not white, just like with the Irish. And so the Ku Klux Klan is particularly upset about the fact that we had almost open borders. And the open borders of people who were, the migrants who were invading America, and I'm being very intentional about my language here, the migrants who were invading our country were these Catholics from Poland and Italy, and another group of invaders, and they were the Jews. Because the second most popular religion in Poland would have been Judaism, and from Eastern Europe. So these invaders, these migrants who were invading us, these Catholics and Jews, really piss off the Ku Klux Klan, because they believe in true-blooded Baptist Christianity. And so that's a big focus of the Klan. They're going to get their way, because in 1925, we finally get relief from this invasion of these migrant hordes. We change our immigration laws so that these people can't come into our country. Poles, Italians, basically Catholics and Jews, we've shut down the borders for them. And so the Klan goes away. It's going to come back, and you're going to hear about them coming back as we get into the civil rights movement. But James Weldon Johnson realizes these laws are the laws of our country that have come directly from Plessy v. Ferguson. They are destroying life for blacks in America. And what he does is he says, I need lawyers. I need lawyers to fight these laws. It's here for lawyers. I need lawyers to fight these laws. So let's go to the next slide. He gets this guy, Charles Hamilton Houston, to be his top gun. Remember I asked you guys last week if you remembered where Kamala Harris graduated from as an undergrad. She was our first presidential candidate who'd gone to an HBCU, historically black college university. She came to Howard She graduated from Howard University, named after Oliver Otis Howard, our 40 acres and a mule guy. Well, Charles Hamilton Houston was this brilliant guy. Graduated from Howard. He went on and he got a doctorate degree from Harvard University. And he came back and he became the dean of the law school at Howard University. And his goal when he became dean was, I'm going to create my own cadre of brilliant lawyers, and we are going to take on Plessy v. Ferguson. We are going to destroy separate but equal. And I know it's going to take time. So let me hit the next slide. So he's now thinking about that, and now world events are going to come into play again. World War II. Just like in World War I, this is everybody into the pool. We need young people are going to get drafted. They're going in the army. If you're not in the army, you're going to work to win the war. V for victory. They got went like that in those days. V for victory.
What's the
We're going to say it again, Peter.
Did Churchill do that?
Churchill went like that. So back in those, during the '60s in the Vietnam War, this was the
flipped
peace
it.
sign.
Yeah.
in the '60s, you know.
Oh, that's why it was a thing.
Say what?
That's why it was a thing. The peace sign in the 60s. I never knew why everybody did that in the 60s. Now I know.
Yeah, that was our peace sign in the 1960s.
Huh.
Yeah, I was one of the perpetrators. This was V for victory, and so you had this. We got to win it. We're in it to win it. Well, and you heard. I can't remember. I went to so many NAC. I went to so many MLK events over the weekend. I can't remember where I heard this, but this is a true story. We started creating defense industries to win the war. You got to build tanks. You got to build airplanes. You got to build trucks. You got to build ships. And Jim Crow went right along with it. Black people, if they got hired at all, they got hired as the people that would sweep the floor of the defense plant. Those weren't the people making the good money. And so the NAACP switched their focus initially from fighting separate but equal in the courts to kind of a boycott campaign. And they decided, because there was and I think we can put up a YouTube song
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell this story, and then we're going to listen to the song.
What's the song?
The song is. Let me get it. This is worth fighting for. I'll show you the video I want you to use.
Archive one from 42.
No. Let's see. No, there should be hit videos. Keep scrolling down.
Do you know who it's by?
Go back up to the top.
Who's it by?
I'm sorry?
Who's it by?
Go back to the search. This is worth fighting for African Americans. Oh, Ink Spot. Do Ink Spots. That's the one I want to watch.
This one right here.
No, this one right
Oh,
here. Okay.
Do it.
So, pause it for a second.
Yep.
And then make it full screen. The NAACP launched this, and we should probably turn out the lights. The NAACP launched this campaign, Double V. Victory in Europe
It's ready. It's ready.
and victory over Jim Crow. And this notion of, when the war started, there was this thing in the black community, is this our fight? You want me to go over to Germany to fight Hitler, and I'm living in the conditions I'm living in here? And so the NAACP said, yes, this is our fight, and we're gonna make it our fight by fighting for the end of Jim Crow at home. And so the Ink Spots, which was an all-black group, very famous vocal quartet, they made the song, This Is Worth Fighting For, and somebody recently, in the last 20 years or so, created this video showing black soldiers during the war. And this really encapsulates that notion of, okay, we're going to be part of this, and we're not just going to make this be about Hitler. So, can I turn out the lights?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
You got it. Okay.
They're double.
I saw a peaceful old valley with a carpet of corn for a floor, and I heard a voice within me whisper, this is worth fighting for. I saw a little old cabin and the river that flowed by the door, and I heard a voice within me whisper, this is worth fighting for. Didn't I build that cabin? Didn't I plant that corn? Didn't my folks before me fight for this country before I was born? I gathered my loved ones around me, and I gazed at each face I adore, and I heard that voice within me thunder, this is worth fighting for.
The other day, we passed through a little old valley. Had a carpet of corn for a floor. And it seemed there was something way down inside of me kept saying, son, that's worth fighting for. A little further along, we passed an old dilapidated cabin. One of them kind with Old Man River flowing right by the door. Seemed like this thing down inside of me kept on saying, son, that's worth fighting for. So I got to thinking, didn't I help to build that cabin? And didn't I help to plant that corn? And didn't my folks way yonder before me fight for this country way before I was born?
I gathered my loved ones around me, and I gazed at each face I adore, and I heard that voice within me thunder, this is worth fighting for.
Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, I wanted to dwell on that for a second because a lot of what's going to happen during the civil rights movement that we think of is going to be led by men and women who took part in World War II, and here we go. Let's see, turn that one off. That's better. And the original March on Washington. Who has ever heard of Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech? Okay. He gives that speech at the culmination of the March on Washington in 1963. Hey, Mr. Wilkes.
Hey.
The original March on Washington was supposed to happen in 1942. 100,000 black men and women were going to march in Washington, D.C., protesting unfair labor practices in the defense industries. And A. Philip Randolph, who was the most important union leader, black union leader in America, goes and meets with Franklin Roosevelt at the White House and tells Roosevelt that's what's going to happen. And Roosevelt says, well, that wouldn't be very good for the country. And Randolph says, well, what are you going to do about it? And what Roosevelt does about it is he desegregates the defense industry plants. So here in Portland, in Vanport, at the Todd shipyards and the Kaiser's shipyards, the positions were desegregated. Blacks had a fair chance of getting decent wages working at the plants. And that was a result of this double V campaign. So the march gets called off. And it's going to come back in 1963, and again, A. Philip Randolph is going to be the man behind the march. So, let's keep going. I figured out which one to put. And here's this great picture of. Anybody? Now Peter will know this. Anybody hear of the Battle of the Bulge? World War II?
Yeah.
Biggest American army fight of the war in Europe. And one of the units that takes part in it is the 761st Tank Destroyer Battalion, all black unit. The guy who might have been there, if he hadn't gotten into a fight with a racist MP during basic training, was Jackie Robinson. He was in that unit. So let's go to the next slide. And the soldiers fighting in World War II. We saw a lot of this in the video, so we can go through this. Keep going. But now, anybody recognize this from a recent event? I can't make this stuff up. What can I tell you? I made this long
And
before.
it was 2 days in a row that he did it.
I know. Go figure.
Elon Musk did that.
Elon Musk did this salute
At the
At
inauguration.
at the
At the
inauguration.
inauguration, 2 days in a row.
I thought it was just 2 times.
He does. It's 2 times. He does it 2 times. I don't think it's 2 days, but he does it 2 times. What's he thinking? That's what Elon, without the mustache, that was what Elon Musk looked like at the inauguration. But I'm going to leave that up. So, unlike World War I, why is World War II a different fight than World War I? Why do I have this picture to emphasize this point? What makes America's fight in World War II different than America's fight in World War I? What was World War II about? Is it what, Peter? Well, he wanted land.
I mean, the cause.
He wanted land for his master race. The clue is in that phrase, master race.
Oh, it's about like he was trying to like just make it so that it was like only like the superior race was like
Right.
with the superior.
He's
race
saying
was
the secret stuff out loud. We are the master race. Someday you're gonna have to show him the Donald Duck one in the Fuhrer's face.
Oh, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, we are the master race. You are subordinates, and we will kill you. This World War, on many levels, World War II was about racism, and a commitment by the rest of the world to stamp that out. That's an important part of our story because that's different than World War I. Because when black soldiers came home from World War I and wanted to be given dignity, okay, all well and good, but there was nothing that we had been doing recently in fighting World War I that said we were on the side of that. But it's going to be different after World War II. Let's go to the next slide. This is what Hitler wanted. These are Jews and gays and Romans, Slavs, subordinate races, subordinate classes, who it was totally appropriate in Hitler's view to starve, work, and gas to death. That's what makes World War II different. It was the belief of the the warmongering class in Japan that they could enslave Chinese because they were less than. Race is all through World War II. Let's go to the next slide. So what happens when black soldiers come home wearing their uniform, thinking that they're full-class American soldiers, and they're beaten and shot and killed because they have the effrontery to wear a uniform and think that that gives them some status? And the most famous of those cases was a black man from South Carolina, Isaac Woodard, who was wearing his uniform on a bus, sat where he wanted to sit. The bus driver called the police, and the police blinded him with a billy club to show him his place. And President Truman, who was a World War I vet, was horrified by that story, because it was all in the context of what World War II was about. So President Truman creates a commission to look at what's wrong with America. And they produce a report called To Secure These Rights, with an introduction by Charles Wilson, the head of Ford Motor Company. This wasn't some radical communist. It was the frickin' head of Ford Motor. And they say, we've got a problem in this country, and we've got to address it. And so, one of the first things Truman does is he desegregates the United States Army and Navy and the newly created Air Force. This sent a seismic shock through the country. You mean I gotta be in the trenches next to a black guy? And he could command me? Well, amazingly, it kind of worked out. It was an astounding social experiment that worked. The country didn't fall apart. And people were starting to get this notion of equality. Let's go to the next. What it does set in motion is a seismic shift in American politics that played out most dramatically in your parents' lifetime. What you have here, remember, Truman desegregates the military in 1948. This is a photograph from the 1948 Democratic Convention, I believe in Cleveland. And this guy up here, Hubert Humphrey, was the mayor of Minneapolis, liberal guy. And he forces into the Democratic Party plank a civil rights plank, which says we are for civil rights. We want to end segregation. Hey, stranger.
Hey.
And how do you think that went over in the South?
Not good.
Say that again?
Not good.
Not good. In fact, so not good that this guy, Strom Thurmond, who was the governor of South Carolina, says, to quote from The Sopranos, "Forget about it. I'm out of here." And he leads a whole group of southern state delegates to walk out of the convention, and they start their own states' rights party. Strom Thurmond is going to become, fast forward to 1964, he's going to become the first Democratic senator to switch, first Southern senator to switch parties, become a Republican, and endorse Barry Goldwater for president against Lyndon Johnson. So the shift of the solid South, which meant all Democratic, every Democrat running for election from about 1900 until 1972 could expect to carry every Democratic state, because the South was solid South Democrat. Now
But the Democrats then were still as they were during the Civil War.
The Democrats were schizophrenic. You had, and that's one of the biggest things that's happened politically in America is our political parties have cured their schizophrenia. The Democratic Party was very progressive labor and very reactionary, racist South. The Republican Party was very conservative business group and reasonably liberal social activist Northeast. Some of the most liberal members of the United States Senate for years were Republicans from Pennsylvania and New York. That was also the face of the Republican Party. Why we've become such so kind of politically is all of that conservative side of the Democratic Party switched over to the Republican Party, and all of that Northeast liberal Republicanism has shifted to the Democrats. So we're now, like I said, each party is way more congruent with itself than it used to be in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So that's the beginning of these incredible the political shifts that you're seeing now in your lifetime. So let's go to the next slide. So, if you remember way back before about half a dozen of my Talmudic digressions, we had the slide of Charles Hamilton Houston up there, who was the dean of the law school at Howard University, who's going to create this cadre of lawyers who are going to take on Plessy v. Ferguson. And one of the most brilliant law students he had was a guy named Thurgood Marshall, later to go on the Supreme Court. It was a total fluke that Charles Hamilton Houston got to know Thurgood Marshall as his most brilliant student. And why was it a fluke? Howard cost money. Thurgood Marshall wanted to go to law school for free at the University of Maryland. He was from Baltimore. He wanted to go to a free law school at the University of Maryland. The University of Maryland wouldn't let him in. Any guesses why the University of Maryland wouldn't let Thurgood Marshall in? What? You like?
He was colored.
Exactly. Don't want none of them around here. So thanks to that, God bless Thurgood Marshall, ends up going to Howard, becomes the star of Charles Hamilton Houston's team, and starts creating his own team. So let's go. Now, one of the things that many people think is, okay, we had seven equal, Plessy v. Ferguson, and then this brilliant team of lawyers goes to the Supreme Court, argues Brown versus Board of Education, and it all disappears. No. It was a campaign. It was a campaign of taking this thing on a bite at a time. And they started biting everywhere around the core till they finally were able to get right to the core. Among the bites was something called discriminatory housing laws. For anybody who are in a house that you own, your parents, when they got their mortgage, etc., there are probably all kinds of covenants. You may have a homeowners association, all kinds of rules that you have to follow in living in your house. And these things are called, these rules are called covenants. A covenant it's basically an agreement between us. And there are certain restrictions. There may be like, you can't put, you can't have a whiskey still in your backyard. Bummer. You can't raise goats. Some of them, you can't have goats in your backyard. Some of them maybe can't have chickens. Terrible idea. But what it used to be was it used to say you can't sell your home to a Negro or an Asiatic or a Jew. And the only people, but you could have them in your house if they're your servants. That was a typical, boiling it down, restrictive covenant. And those were legal. The Supreme Court in the early 1900s had said, yep, fine with us. Well, in the 1940s, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP went back into the Supreme Court. And this is one of the victories. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You can't have that in your lease and expect the court system to support you. Because if the court system supports you, that's a state action. It's denying you due process. And the 14th Amendment says states can't do that. States can't deny your due process or your equal protection of the laws. You also said you're a citizen if you were born here. So that was the first bite of the apple. Let's go to the next. Some other bites of the apple. Interstate travel. When Irene Morgan, during the war, was going from Washington, D.C. back to her home in Richmond, just south of D.C. in Virginia, she decided to sit in the front of the bus. And when they got in the state of Virginia, that was illegal. Blacks had to sit in the back of the bus. On a Greyhound-like style bus. And the sheriff tried to arrest her. She punched out the sheriff. Then another sheriff got and hauled her off the bus. And she got convicted of violating that law. And the Supreme Court said, no, wait a second. The Interstate Commerce Act says it has to be desegregated. So we support that. Another bite at the apple. Let's see what other bites we get. I think this is the University of Oklahoma, the law school. This gentleman wanted to be a lawyer. University of Oklahoma said, no. We don't let coloreds in here to go to law school. He sues, unlike Thurgood Marshall, who just went to Howard. He sued, and the Supreme Court said, actually, states, you can have segregation, but it's got to be, separate but equal. You can build this guy a law school. If you want to, you can build this guy a law school and educate him. But if you don't want to build a law school to educate him, he's got to go to your law school. So they kept him as separate as possible. He had to sit outside the classroom at his own desk. But the Supreme Court is now saying there are limits to separate but equal. So these are all bites of the apple. Let's go to the next slide. Pauli Murray, probably, I used to say Bayard Rustin was the most important civil rights person nobody had ever heard of, but now people have heard of him. Pauli Murray is now at the top of my list of the most important civil rights people nobody had ever heard of. She was I'm going to use the word she was a just brilliant thinker. She was probably transgendered, but she was never able to act on it. I'll start using they as much as I can. They were convinced they were male. They were born by all outward appearances as female. They were convinced they were male. They tried to get a doctor to give them hormone therapy, and this is back in the 1940s, and the doctor wouldn't do it. They were convinced that they had male body parts that just sort of hadn't shown up. And eventually, they had x-rays that were able to convince them there are no body parts there that didn't show up. You are biologically female. They really never accepted it. The interesting thing about Pauli Murray was their father had spent much of their life in a mental asylum. Was ultimately killed by an orderly at the asylum. Their mother also had mental health issues. And so one of the real tragedies to me of Pauli Murray's life was they were desperate not to be considered mentally ill because of their parental heritage. In the 1930s and 1940s, being gay or homosexuality, which was the term at the time, was considered a mental illness. And so they were desperate not to be labeled mentally ill, so they tried to pass. They had a non-sexual marriage with a male that after a few years they both realized it was a disaster and they divorced. They always dressed in pants, very male in their appearance. Fast forward to the end of after a brilliant career as a lawyer, a brilliant career as a professor, they decided they wanted to become an Episcopalian priest. Pauli Murray became the first black female Episcopalian priest, and they are now considered an Episcopalian saint. If anybody, I used to teach at Oregon Episcopal School, and they are venerated as the saint in the Episcopalian faith. But back to our story, and I'm going to probably finish with this piece of it, and then we'll pick up the lawsuit when I come back. I'm coming back Monday.
No, Monday's no school. Next Friday.
Monday's no school. This coming Monday?
It's a work day.
Oh, okay. That'll be next Friday. We'll pick up the story. Pauli Murray, I'm now going to start referring to her as she, because that's how she was viewed by the world in this phase of the story. She goes to Howard as an undergraduate, and because she tries to go to the University of North Carolina, her home state, she's not accepted. Anybody guess why she's not accepted at the University of North Carolina?
Guessing that. Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry, what?
Trying to decide.
Yeah.
One.
Pick one of
You got some choices here.
Just say yes.
Anyone going to help Eli out? Why do you think?
That's TJ, I'm UI.
I'm sorry, what?
Cause she was colored.
Right. Did somebody say that?
TJ, Eli. you
Oh,
just
okay, you
need
got it
to-
together. Okay. Yeah, she was viewed as colored, which she was, and University of North Carolina, no. So again, fortunately for us, she goes to Howard University. Then she wants to go to law school. Howard University says, a woman wants to be a lawyer? Girls get to do that? Not on my watch. But she kind of forces her way in. They finally accept her. And of course, to prove everybody wrong, she graduates first in her class. She's the valedictorian of her law school class. And she takes a class, and I can't remember what class it was. Could have been a criminal law class. But one of her professors is part of this team of Thurgood Marshall. I think it was Spotswood Robinson. And she comes up with a theory about separate versus equal. Let's go back to that slide of Charles McLaurin. Yeah, here. He gets the same law school education as his classmates at the University of Oklahoma, but he's kept separate. So go back to Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray writes a term paper for Spotswood Robinson. And she says, you're really going about this the wrong way. You're going about this all around, this is an equal. Okay. Have you considered the damage that the word separate creates? When you're telling a group of people they have to be kept separate, what are you telling them? What does that do to somebody when we say to them, oh no,
We don't want you
can't
here.
play with us. Say it again, Ian?
We don't want you here.
We don't want you here. What's the message that's being internalized when that's what's talked about? We're gonna save it there for next Friday. Cut. I didn't bring this guitar for nothing. I got what, 6, 7 minutes?
Yeah.